The metal floor shakes under my boots, before I even hear the breach alarm. Sparks rain down from the ceiling vents, and the air turns thick with the smell of burnt wiring. My hands are already moving before my mind catches up, reaching for the sidearm strapped to my thigh. But a heavy weight slams into my shoulder and knocks me flat against the wall. 3 of them surround me before I can blink the dust from my eyes. Tall, gray-skinned, with long limbs that bend in places human joints never do. Their armor hums with a soft blue light, and the weapons in their hands are pointed straight at my chest. I raise my hands slowly, my heart pounding so hard I can feel it in my ears. "Human pilot, comply," one of them says, its voice flat and mechanical through a translator device clipped to its collar. "Resistance will not be tolerated." I do not move. I do not speak. I only watch. Another one steps forward and pulls the sidearm from my holster with 2 clawed fingers, holding it up like it is something fragile and strange. Then it reaches for the combat knife strapped to my boot, and finally the small emergency blade hidden in my sleeve, one that most boarding parties never even think to search for. They find it anyway. Someone briefed them well. "Weapons secured," the lead one reports, into a device on its wrist. The human is disarmed. I let my shoulders drop. Just slightly. Just enough to look defeated. Inside, I am doing something very different. I am counting. 3 guards. 2 exits behind me. One collapsed under debris. A ventilation shaft above the control panel that is just wide enough for a person my size. The nearest guard's weapon is held in his left hand, which means his right side is open for half a second every time he shifts his footing. They do not know what they just did. They think taking my weapons made me harmless. They have no idea that where I come from, weapons were never really the point. They pull me up by the arms, not gently, and march me down the corridor of my own ship, past the shattered viewport, where I can see their vessel locked alongside mine, wide and dark against the stars. I glance at the wreckage of my console, the blinking distress signal I had barely managed to send before they cut through the hull. Somewhere out there, someone might have heard it. Or maybe not. I cannot count on rescue. I never have. "Move," the guard behind me orders, pushing me forward with the flat of his weapon. I move. I let them think I am simply obeying. The corridor to their shuttle is narrow, lined with strange markings I do not recognize, some kind of written language that glows faintly under the low light. I study every turn, every seam in the wall, every place a door might open or close. This is not defeat. This is preparation. I have done this before, in different rooms, against different kinds of danger, and every single time the lesson was the same. Attention is the only weapon that can never be confiscated. We reach the shuttle bay, and I am shoved into a small holding pod, barely large enough to stand and turn around in. The door seals with a hiss, and through the reinforced glass I watch the lead guard speak to someone on a screen I cannot see. I catch fragments of the translated words drifting through a speaker in the ceiling. The human offered no resistance, weapons confiscated, no injuries reported, species appears cooperative once disarmed. Cooperative, I almost smile at that word, but I keep my face still, blank, unremarkable. That is exactly what I want them to see. The shuttle shudders as it detaches from my ship, and through the small window I watch my vessel grow smaller, drifting silent and broken against the black. A part of me aches at the sight of it, at the thought of everything lost in that wreck. But I push the feeling down where it cannot slow me. There will be time to grieve later. Right now there is only the mission of staying alive, and alive means paying attention. The pod hums as it moves through the larger ship, and I catch glimpses of the interior through the glass. Long corridors, high ceilings built for their taller frames. Guards stationed at regular intervals, all carrying the same kind of weapon, all standing the same relaxed way, like they have never once faced anything that made them nervous. That tells me something important. These are not soldiers who expect trouble. These are soldiers who have grown comfortable. Comfort makes people slow. I learned that a long time ago, back when I was young, and still training for a life I did not yet understand I would need. Comfort makes people forget to check the corners. The pod finally stops, and the door slides open with a soft chime. 2 new guards are waiting, different from the ones who captured me, their armor marked with a different color along the shoulders. One of them studies me with something that looks almost like curiosity, tilting its head the way a bird might when it hears an unfamiliar sound. "This is the human," the guard from my ship says, handing over a small device. likely containing whatever data they scraped from my console before the pod left. Unarmed. No weapons detected on final scan. Understood, the new guard replies. Facility protocol confirms unarmed prisoners require minimal restraint. Minimal restraint. I file that phrase away carefully, turning it over in my mind like a stone I might need later. They lead me out of the pod and down another corridor, this one colder, lined with doors instead of open space. Through small windows in some of the doors, I catch glimpses of other prisoners, other species, some large, some small, all wearing the same dull gray clothing I am about to be given. My stomach tightens at the sight, but I keep walking, keep my face calm, keep my eyes moving, even while my head stays still. We pass a wide window that looks out over what must be the lower levels of the facility. A massive open space filled with rows of holding cells stacked on top of each other, connected by narrow walkways and lifts. It is bigger than I expected, much bigger. This is not a temporary holding station. This is something built to last, something built by people who expected to keep prisoners for a very long time. Why so many? I ask quietly, more to myself than to the guards, but the translator on the nearest one picks it up anyway. The Threshold Accord believes in containment over conflict, it answers, almost proudly. Species who cannot control their weapons are removed from circulation until they demonstrate peaceful behavior. It is a merciful system. Merciful. Another word I file away. We stop outside a door near the end of the corridor, and one of the guards presses a hand against a panel beside it. The door slides open, revealing a small room with a narrow bed, a metal table, and a single chair bolted to the floor. There is a slit of a window near the ceiling, too small for a person to fit through, letting in a thin strip of artificial light from somewhere above. You will remain here until processing is complete, the guard says. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance is pointless, as you have no means of resistance remaining. I step inside without a word, and the door slides shut behind me with a heavy final sound. I stand in the middle of the small room for a long moment, listening to the hum of the facility around me, the distant murmur of voices I cannot understand, the soft click of machinery somewhere in the walls. Then I sit down on the edge of the bed and finally let myself breathe. They think they have taken everything from me. My weapon, my knife, my ship, my freedom. They stood there and watched a scanner confirm I carried nothing dangerous, and they walked away satisfied, certain, comfortable. They looked at empty hands and saw nothing to fear. They never once stopped to ask what those hands were attached to, or what kind of mind was directing them, or what history had shaped the person standing quietly in front of them, with lowered eyes and a still face. They measured danger the only way they knew how, by counting metal and circuitry and stored energy, and by that measurement, I passed every test with ease. But danger was never something I carried in a holster. It was something I carried inside my skin, learned over years of training, sharpened by every mission that ever went wrong, built into the very way I breathe and think and move. No scanner in the galaxy can detect that. No confiscation can take it away. I lie back on the narrow bed and stare up at the ceiling, letting my mind slow down, letting the adrenaline settle into something quieter and more useful. Patience. That is the first skill anyone ever taught me. Long before the fighting, long before the missions that took me further from home than I ever imagined I would go. Patience and observation and the willingness to wait for exactly the right moment. Somewhere above me, the light flickers once, and I hear the faint sound of footsteps passing outside my door. Unhurried, careless, the footsteps of people who have never once needed to be afraid of the thing they just locked away. They will learn. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. I close my eyes, not to sleep, but to think, to plan, to remember every detail I gathered on the walk from the shuttle bay to this room, the width of the corridors, the placement of the guards, the rhythm of their patrols, the location of the lifts, the size of that massive holding chamber I glimpsed through the window, and the walkways that connected it all together, like a spider's web waiting to be shaken loose. Somewhere out there, on the other side of this facility, is a way out. There always is. I have never yet found a cage that did not have a weakness, and I do not intend to start believing in perfect cages now, especially not one built by people who think a scanner is enough to make someone harmless. The door across the corridor creaks faintly, and I hear a voice, low and careful, drifting through the thin walls. "Hey," it says, in accented but clear English. "New one. You awake?" I open my eyes and sit up slowly, turning toward the sound. "I'm awake," I say quietly. "Good," the voice replies. "You're going to want to be. Things move fast in here, once they start moving at all." I stare at the wall between us, listening to the quiet hum of the facility, and for the first time since the boarding alarm went off, I feel something that is not quite fear and not quite hope, but sits somewhere close to both. They took my weapons. They have no idea what is still standing in this room. The next morning, if it can even be called morning in a place with no sun, a soft chime wakes me before the door to my cell slides open. A guard stands there, shorter than the ones from the shuttle bay, with markings on its shoulder that suggest a lower rank. "Meal period," it says flatly. "Follow the line. Do not deviate from the path." I stand and walk out into the corridor, where a small group of prisoners from nearby cells is already forming a slow, quiet line. I fall in step behind them, careful to keep my movements calm and unremarkable, watching everything without seeming to watch anything at all. The voice from last night belongs to a woman a few places ahead of me in line. She glances back once, just briefly, and gives me a small nod before facing forward again. She has short brown hair and a face that looks tired but alert, the kind of alertness that comes from surviving somewhere long enough to stop being surprised by it. We are led through a series of corridors toward a large open hall, and this is my first real look at the scale of the place. The ceiling stretches high overhead, crossed with metal walkways and lift shafts. Rows of tables fill the room below, most of them occupied by prisoners of different shapes and sizes, some with skin like stone, some with too many limbs to count comfortably, all wearing the same dull gray clothing. Guards stand at intervals along the walls, weapons resting easily in their hands, watching the room with the bored patience of people who expect nothing to happen. I take a tray from a dispenser along the wall, following the lead of the prisoners ahead of me, and find a seat at the end of a long table. A moment later, the woman from the corridor sits across from me, setting her own tray down with practiced ease. "You're the new capture," she says quietly. "Word travels fast in here." "My name is Grace." "Ethan," I reply, matching her low tone. "How long were you in space before they got you?" "Not long enough to matter," I say. "They came out of nowhere." Grace nods slowly, stirring the pale contents of her tray with a small utensil. "That's usually how it goes. The Accord doesn't believe in warning shots. They believe in overwhelming force, followed by very polite paperwork." I glance around the hall again, taking in the guard positions, the exits, the lift shafts near the far wall. "How many humans are here?" "A dozen, maybe more, spread across different sections," Grace says. "They don't keep us together on purpose. Easier to manage that way, or so they think." "How long have you been here?" She is quiet for a moment, and something tightens behind her eyes. "Long enough to know every guard's schedule by heart. Long enough to know which doors stick a little when they close. Long enough to know that this place runs on routine, and routine is the only thing keeping any of us sane." I file that information away carefully, the same way I filed away every detail from the walk through the corridors last night. Routine is useful. Routine can be studied, predicted, and eventually broken. "They took everything from you when you arrived, didn't they?" Grace says, watching my face carefully. "Every weapon I had," I say, "down to the smallest blade." "They always do," she says, a faint, humorless smile crossing her face. "They're very thorough about weapons. It's practically a religion for them. The Accord believes a species can be measured entirely by the danger of its tools. Take away the tools, and the danger disappears." "That's the theory, anyway." "And you don't agree with the theory," I say. Grace leans forward slightly, lowering her voice even further. "I've watched them scan every prisoner who comes through those doors. I've watched them relax the moment the scanner shows nothing dangerous. And I've watched them completely fail to understand why that should worry them more, not less." A guard passes near our table, and we both fall silent, eyes down, faces neutral, until the footsteps move on. Grace waits a few more seconds before continuing. "They've never fought a human without a weapon in their hand," she says. "Not really fought, I mean. Not up close. Every human they've ever faced either had a gun, or surrendered before things got that far. So in their records, in their careful little files, Humans without weapons are simply humans without danger. It's not stupidity exactly. It's just a blind spot. A very large, very convenient blind spot. I think about the guard who called me cooperative on the shuttle, the pride in the other guard's voice when he called the facility merciful. I think about how easily they walked away from me after the scanner came back clean, certain they had removed every possible threat. How does a place like this stay secure then, I ask, if the guards are this relaxed? Numbers, Grace says simply. There are more of them than there are of us, and they're bigger, and they have weapons we don't. On paper, that's more than enough security. It's worked for them for a very long time, against a lot of very different species. Most of the people in this facility never had a reason to fight back with nothing but their hands. Most species here rely on tools the same way the Accord does. Take the tools away, and there's nothing left. Most species, I repeat. Grace meets my eyes, and something passes between us, quiet and understood, without needing more words. Most species, she agrees. The meal period ends with another chime, and the prisoners begin filing out in the same slow, orderly line as before. Grace and I are separated as the guards direct different groups toward different corridors, but before she disappears into the crowd, she glances back at me one more time. Watch the guard rotations near the eastern lift, she says quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. Shift change happens twice a day, and for about 90 seconds, the coverage gets thin. Every single day. Nobody's ever needed to use that gap, yet. Then she is gone, swallowed by the line of prisoners moving toward the far corridor, and I am left standing there with a guard gesturing impatiently for me to keep moving. Over the following hours, I am led through a series of processing stations, each one designed to catalog and evaluate me as a prisoner. My height and weight are measured. My vital signs are recorded. A technician runs a small device over my body, murmuring notes into a translator that converts them into flat, mechanical English for my benefit, or perhaps simply as a formality. No implants detected. No concealed devices. No unusual biological markers of concern. The technician reports, sounding almost bored. Threat assessment, another voice asks from somewhere nearby. Minimal. The technician replies. Species is physically unremarkable without tools. Standard containment protocol is more than sufficient. I keep my face still as the words wash over me, but inside, I am cataloging every piece of that assessment, every assumption baked into their casual dismissal. They have measured my body, and found nothing frightening. They have not measured my training. They have not measured the years spent learning how to move quietly, how to strike quickly, how to turn ordinary objects into extraordinary tools. They have not measured the part of me that spent countless nights preparing for exactly this kind of situation, long before I ever expected to need it. Later, I am led back to my cell, and through the thin walls, I hear the quiet murmur of other prisoners settling in for whatever passes as night in this place. I lie on the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying every detail from the day in careful order. The eastern lift, shift change, twice daily, 90 seconds of thin coverage. Grace's voice, calm and steady, offering information like a gift she had been saving for someone who might actually use it. I think about the layout of the facility, as I understood it from the walk through the halls, the massive open chamber with its rows of stacked cells, the walkways connecting different levels, the guards who patrol with the relaxed confidence of people who have never once been tested. I think about the mealtime hall, wide and open, filled with tables that could become obstacles, or cover, depending on how a person chose to look at them. I think about the processing stations, filled with small devices and equipment that most people would overlook, but that could become something else entirely in the right hands. A soft knock sounds against the wall separating my cell from the next. 3 careful taps, followed by a pause, then 2 more. I sit up slowly and move closer to the wall. "Ethan," Grace's voice says quietly through the thin barrier. "You still awake?" "Still awake," I say. "They're moving new prisoners in tomorrow," she says. "A larger group than usual. It means extra guards pulled from regular rotation to help with processing. It means schedules get disrupted, at least for a few hours." "You've been planning something," I say. It is not really a question. There is a pause, long enough that I begin to wonder if she heard me at all. Then her voice returns, quieter than before, almost hesitant. I've been surviving, she says. Planning is different. Planning means believing there's actually a way out, and believing that gets dangerous in a place like this, if you let yourself believe it too soon, too loudly. And now? Another pause. Now there's a human in the cell next to mine, who walked into this facility with nothing but his hands, and didn't look the least bit afraid when they told him he was harmless. I lean my head back against the cold wall, letting her words settle over me. I wasn't afraid, I say quietly. I was listening. There's a difference. I noticed, Grace says, and I can hear something shift in her voice, something that sounds almost like the beginning of hope, carefully guarded, not yet allowed to grow too large. Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, one way or another. I lie back on the bed as her footsteps move away from the wall, and I stare up at the thin strip of light filtering down from the small window near the ceiling. Somewhere above this facility, stars are turning in patterns I cannot see from here, and somewhere among them, my ship is drifting broken and silent, a distress signal fading into empty space. They think they have taken everything from me. My weapons, my ship, my freedom, all catalogued and confiscated and filed away as evidence of a threat successfully neutralized. They have not yet learned the difference between a threat and a person who is simply waiting for the right moment to remind them what that word actually means. I close my eyes, and for the first time since the boarding alarm sounded, I let myself think not just about surviving the night, but about tomorrow, and the 90 seconds of thin coverage near the eastern lift, and the new group of prisoners who will disrupt every careful routine this facility has ever relied upon. Somewhere in the dark, a guard's footsteps pass by my door, slow and unhurried, careless in the particular way that only comes from never once having needed to be careful. Soon, I think. Not tonight, but soon. The chime that wakes me the next morning sounds different, sharper, layered with the distant echo of raised voices somewhere down the corridor. I sit up immediately, every muscle alert before my mind has even finished processing the sound. Through the small window in my door, I catch glimpses of movement, guards walking faster than usual, their postures stiff with the particular tension of people managing something they had not fully planned for. Grace's warning from the night before comes back to me instantly. New prisoners. A disrupted schedule. Extra guards pulled from their normal rotation. The door to my cell slides open sooner than expected, and a guard I do not recognize gestures for me to step out. Move, it says, its translated voice clipped and hurried, lacking the calm authority of yesterday's guards. Holding area reassignment, quickly. I step into the corridor and find it filled with more prisoners than I have seen at once since arriving, all being herded in loose, disorganized groups toward the large open chamber I glimpsed on my first day. The usual quiet order of the facility has cracked, just slightly, replaced by something closer to controlled confusion. Guards call out instructions that overlap and contradict each other. Prisoners shuffle uncertainly between conflicting directions. I spot Grace a short distance away, positioned near the edge of a group being funneled toward the same lift shaft she mentioned the night before. She catches my eye for half a second, and something passes between us, silent and immediate. This is the disruption she was talking about. The line of prisoners moves slowly toward the open chamber, and as we pass beneath one of the high walkways, I notice something that makes my pulse quicken. A supply cart, unattended, pushed against the wall near a maintenance access panel, loaded with tools and equipment, left behind by whoever was using it before the chaos of new arrivals pulled them away. A few meters beyond it, the eastern lift stands with its doors open, empty, its usual guard nowhere in sight. 90 seconds of thin coverage. It seems today, for reasons entirely outside anyone's control, that window has opened early, and wider than usual. I do not rush. Rushing draws attention. Instead, I let my steps slow just enough to fall toward the edge of the moving crowd, angling myself closer to the wall, closer to the cart, closer to the open lift. Around me, prisoners of a dozen different species move in their own directions, some pushing forward eagerly, some hanging back nervously, creating exactly the kind of shifting, uneven crowd that makes it hard for anyone watching to track a single figure with certainty. A guard shouts something further down the hall, and for a moment, every head in the crowd turns toward the sound. That is all the opening I need. I step sideways, out of the flow of prisoners, and move quickly toward the supply cart. My hands find a length of metal rod among the tools, something used for adjusting panel fittings, plain and unremarkable, the kind of object no scanner would ever flag as dangerous. To me, in this moment, it is simply an extension of my arm, a tool the way my hands have always been tools, shaped by purpose rather than by design. I reach the open lift just as a guard rounds the corner behind me, weapon raised halfway before it fully registers what it is seeing. I do not give it time to finish that thought. I move in fast and low, using the length of the rod to knock the weapon aside before it can be aimed properly, then close the distance and use controlled, precise pressure to bring the guard down without causing lasting harm, guiding it firmly to the floor and pinning its arm behind its back until it stops struggling. It is over in seconds, quiet, contained, almost gentle, compared to what the guard clearly expected when it saw an unarmed prisoner standing near an open lift. I drag the guard just out of sight behind the supply cart and press my back against the wall, breathing steady, listening. No alarm yet, no shouting. The chaos of the new arrivals continues down the corridor, covering the sound of what just happened here. Grace appears a moment later, having slipped free of her own group during the confusion, moving low and quick along the wall until she reaches my side. "You didn't waste any time," she whispers, glancing down at the guard now sitting motionless and disarmed behind the cart. "You said 90 seconds, I reply quietly. I try not to waste openings. She crouches beside the guard and quickly strips a small device from its belt, something that looks like a key or access card, along with the weapon it had been carrying. "This will get us through most of the lower doors," she says, holding up the device. "And this," she adds, lifting the confiscated weapon, "will make the next part considerably easier." I take the weapon from her hand, feeling its unfamiliar weight settle against my palm, and something in my chest tightens with grim satisfaction. They took my weapons at the door. They never considered that a facility built around weapons would always have more of them lying around for someone patient enough to wait. "There are others," I say. "Other humans. Other prisoners who might want a chance at this too." Grace nods, already moving toward the lift controls. "The eastern block holds most of them. If we can get the lift running before that guard is found missing, we can reach 3 more levels before anyone even realizes something is wrong." We step into the lift together, and Grace uses the stolen access device against a panel beside the door. The lift hums to life, doors sliding shut, carrying us downward with a soft, steady motion that feels almost peaceful compared to the tension coiled in my chest. "How many guards are stationed on the lower levels?" I ask. "Fewer than up top," Grace says. "Most of the serious security is focused on entry and exit points, not internal movement. They've never had a reason to expect trouble from the inside." The lift stops, and the doors slide open onto a corridor much like the one above, lined with holding cells, quieter, dimmer, clearly considered lower priority by whoever designed this place. 2 guards stand near the far end, engaged in some kind of conversation, weapons resting easily in their hands, completely unaware of what has just happened 3 levels above them. Grace moves first this time, slipping along the wall with practiced silence, and I follow close behind, staying low, staying quiet, letting my training take over the way it always does when the moment finally arrives. We close the distance quickly, and before either guard can fully register our presence, we are already moving, Grace disabling one with a swift, controlled strike to a pressure point along its neck, while I close the gap on the other, sweeping its legs and pinning it to the ground before it can raise the alarm. Neither guard is seriously harmed. That matters to me, more than I expected it to. This is not about causing suffering. This is about reclaiming something that was taken, quietly, efficiently, and with as little unnecessary damage as possible. We move down the corridor quickly, and Grace uses the stolen access device to open the first cell we reach. Inside, a man with sandy hair and tired eyes looks up in confusion, then shock, as the door slides open without a guard standing behind it. "Grace," he says, disbelief coloring his voice. "What?" "No time," Grace says quickly. "We're moving. Now." The man scrambles to his feet, and within moments, we are opening the next cell, and the next, gathering a small but growing group of prisoners who move with the cautious, coiled energy of people who have spent far too long waiting for exactly this kind of moment. By the time we reach the fourth cell, the corridor holds 6 of us, all human, all moving with quiet purpose, despite the trembling uncertainty visible in a few of their faces. I understand that fear. Hope, after long enough without it, can feel almost as dangerous as despair. We need to move toward the maintenance access I saw near the supply cart upstairs, I say quietly, gathering the group around me. If the layout matches what I remember from processing, that route should connect to the lower ventilation systems, which likely lead toward an exterior maintenance hatch. You've only been here a day, one of the newly freed prisoners says, staring at me with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. How do you know all that? Because I never stopped paying attention, I say simply. Not for 1 second since they brought me through that door. A distant sound echoes down the corridor behind us, a rising alarm, sharp and insistent, finally acknowledging what has already happened 3 levels above. Grace's expression tightens. They found the guard, she says. We need to move faster. We push forward as a group, using the stolen access device to unlock doors as we go, moving with the kind of urgency that comes from knowing exactly how narrow this window has become. Guards begin appearing further down the connecting corridors, alerted now, weapons raised, voices sharp with confusion and growing alarm, as they process the sight of an escaped, organized group of prisoners, moving with clear purpose, through levels they were never supposed to reach. I take point without needing to be asked, using the confiscated weapon only when absolutely necessary, relying instead on speed, positioning, and the simple, overwhelming advantage of guards, who have never once trained against people willing to close the distance and fight without waiting for permission from a weapon in their hand. Every guard we encounter reacts the same way, a half-second of confusion before their training catches up, and that half-second is more than enough for those of us who spent years learning to never need it. We reach the maintenance access panel Grace remembered from her long months of careful observation, and I use the flat edge of the stolen tool to force it open, revealing a narrow shaft lined with pipes and cabling, dimly lit by small emergency lights spaced along its length. This will take us toward the lower ventilation systems, Grace confirms, glancing at a small display built into the wall beside the shaft. From there, if the layout hasn't changed, we should reach an exterior maintenance hatch within a few hundred meters. Behind us, the alarm grows louder, joined now by the distant sound of heavier footsteps, more guards, moving with the kind of urgency that suggests the facility's leadership has finally understood the scale of what is happening. They'll seal every exit they can reach, I say, glancing back down the corridor. Then we go now, Grace says, already climbing into the shaft, before they finish realizing they should have taken this a lot more seriously from the very beginning. I glance once more at the corridor behind us, at the flickering emergency lights, and the distant shapes of guards finally beginning to understand the shape of the danger they dismissed so easily on their first, careless scan. Then I climb into the shaft behind Grace and the others, moving quickly through the narrow, dimly lit passage, every sense alert, every muscle ready, carrying nothing but a stolen weapon, a length of plain metal rod, and the same quiet, patient determination that has carried me through every dangerous moment of my life, long before I ever needed to prove it to a facility full of people who thought a scanner could measure the full weight of what a person is capable of. They confiscated every weapon they could see. They are only now beginning to understand exactly how much they missed. The shaft stretches on longer than I expected, narrow and warm from the machinery running along its walls, filled with the steady hum of ventilation systems working somewhere deeper in the facility. We move quickly, single file, Grace leading the way, with the confidence of someone who spent countless quiet hours memorizing every inch of this place, long before she ever had a reason to use that knowledge. Behind me, I hear the others breathing hard, the sound of people pushing themselves past exhaustion, on nothing but adrenaline, and the fragile, dangerous thing called hope. I glance back once, taking a quick count. 6 of us, moving together, no one left behind. There, Grace says quietly, pointing ahead to where the shaft opens into a wider space, lit by the same dim emergency lighting. Ventilation junction. From here, the exterior hatch should be close. We climb down into the junction, and I take a moment to listen carefully, filtering out the sound of our own breathing, searching for any hint of guards moving nearby. The facility's alarm still echoes somewhere above us, muffled now by distance and layers of metal, but I do not let myself relax. An alarm that has gone quiet nearby does not mean the danger has passed. it often means the danger has simply moved somewhere else, gathering itself before the next confrontation. They'll have sealed the obvious exits by now, I say, thinking through the layout as Grace described it. Which means whatever hatch we're heading toward, we should assume they already know about it too. Grace nods grimly. There's no path out of this place that stays secret for long. Not once they realize prisoners are actually moving with a plan, instead of just running. One of the freed prisoners, the sandy-haired man from the first cell we opened, speaks up nervously from the back of the group. Then what's the point of heading there at all, if they already know? I think about the question for a moment, turning it over the way I turn over every problem before deciding how to answer. Because knowing about an exit and successfully defending it are two very different things, I say. They built this facility to hold people who arrive already broken, already defeated, already convinced that resistance is pointless. They did not build it to hold people who decided the moment they walked through the door that pointless was simply a word other people used when they had already given up. The group falls quiet at that, and Grace gives me a brief, appraising look before gesturing for us to keep moving. We push forward through another stretch of narrow passage, and I find myself thinking, not for the first time since this began, about the long history that brought me to this exact moment. My training did not begin the day I stepped onto a starship. It began years before that, in a life shaped by an understanding that survival was never guaranteed simply by having the right tool in hand. Every skill I carry with me now, every instinct that moves my body without needing permission from my conscious mind, was built through years of learning that a person's true weapon has never really been the object they hold. It has always been the mind directing that object, and more than that, the mind willing to act even when every object has been taken away. Humanity's entire history is written in that lesson, if anyone ever cared to read it carefully. Long before there were weapons of metal and fire, there were simply people, walking further and enduring longer than almost anything else, sharing the same world, capable of tracking prey across days and distances that should have been impossible, driven forward not by superior strength or speed, but by sheer, stubborn persistence. That persistence never disappeared. It simply changed shape over time, moving from tracking animals across open plains to tracking solutions across impossible problems, refusing every single time to accept that impossible actually meant impossible. The Accord measured danger by counting metal and stored energy, and by that measurement, they were not entirely wrong. Weapons matter, tools matter, but they built their entire system of safety around a single, quietly dangerous assumption that removing the tool removes the danger, without ever stopping to ask what kind of species built that tool in the first place, or why, or what that species might still be capable of once every tool had been taken away. We reach a heavier door near the end of the passage, and Grace presses the stolen access device against the panel beside it. The door groans, resists for a moment, then slides open just enough for us to slip through one at a time into a wider corridor beyond. The moment I step through, I know immediately that Grace was right. Guards wait for us on the other side, more than I expected, arranged in a loose formation that suggests they anticipated exactly this route, weapons raised and ready. "Down," I shout, dropping low and pulling the nearest prisoner with me, as the first shots ring out, energy bolts scorching harmlessly overhead into the metal wall behind us. The corridor becomes chaos, guards shouting orders, prisoners scrambling for cover behind support struts and equipment lockers, the confiscated weapon in my hand, suddenly feeling far too light for the situation unfolding around us. I return fire carefully, aiming to disable rather than destroy, forcing guards to duck back behind cover rather than press their advantage. Grace moves beside me, using the terrain with the same careful precision she used to plan our entire route through this facility. "There's a side passage 20 meters ahead," she calls over the noise. "If we can push through their formation, it circles back toward the hatch from a different angle. Then we push," I say. I glance back at the group behind us, faces tight with fear, but eyes fixed forward, ready. This is the moment every bit of preparation has been building toward, and I understand with sudden, absolute clarity that the guards ahead of us are not facing a group of desperate, disorganized prisoners anymore. They are facing something they never accounted for in any of their careful, confident assessments. They are facing people who decided, the instant every weapon was taken from their hands, that their hands were never really the point. I move first, using a piece of fallen equipment as cover, closing the distance toward the nearest guard formation faster than their training seems to have prepared them for. Guards who expect a slow, defensive retreat from unarmed prisoners are not prepared for prisoners who choose instead to close the gap directly, using speed and unpredictability as their own kind of weapon. The confrontation is fast, controlled, and over, before the guards can fully reorganize their formation. I do not aim to cause lasting harm, only to clear a path, disabling weapons, forcing retreats, using every ounce of training to turn their own confusion into our advantage. Behind me, Grace leads the rest of the group through the gap we create, moving quickly toward the side passage she identified. We reach it just as reinforcements begin pouring into the corridor behind us, a much larger group of guards, alerted now to the full scale of what is happening deep within their own facility. I glance back once, watching them regroup, watching the confusion on their faces slowly shift into something closer to alarm, closer to the beginning of real fear. They are starting to understand. We push through the side passage, and Grace leads us through a series of tight turns, each one bringing us closer to a heavy door, marked with symbols I do not recognize, but that clearly indicate some kind of exterior access point. "This is it," Grace says, breathing hard, pressing the stolen access device against the final panel. "If this works, we're out." The door begins to slide open, revealing a glimpse of the world beyond, a wide landing platform, bathed in the pale light of a distant sun. Ships of various sizes parked in careful rows, guards stationed near each one, none of them yet aware of the chaos unfolding just beyond the walls behind them. Before we can step through, a voice echoes down the corridor behind us, amplified, carrying an authority none of the earlier guards possessed. "Halt," it commands, the translated word sharp and absolute. "You will not reach that platform." I turn slowly, and find myself facing a new figure, taller than the others, armor marked with intricate patterns that clearly denote rank far beyond anything we have encountered so far. Behind this figure, a full contingent of heavily armed guards fills the corridor, weapons raised, formation tight and disciplined, in a way the earlier, more relaxed patrols never were. "You have caused considerable disruption," the figure says, its translated voice carrying something between anger and genuine, unsettled confusion. "This facility has never experienced an internal breach of this scale. Explain how an unarmed prisoner organized this." I stand my ground, weapon lowered but not discarded, meeting the figure's gaze directly, despite the clear difference in size and armament between us. "You confiscated every weapon your scanners could detect," I say, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. "You never once considered that the most dangerous thing you brought onto this facility wasn't something a scanner could find." The figure tilts its head slightly, studying me with something that looks almost like the beginning of understanding, though whether that understanding will arrive in time to change what happens next remains, for the moment, entirely uncertain. "Then perhaps," it says slowly, "it is time this facility learned exactly what it failed to measure." The corridor falls into a tense, brittle silence, broken only by the distant hum of the platform doors, still sliding slowly open behind us. I feel the weight of every eye in that hallway, guards and prisoners alike, waiting to see what happens next, between an unarmed group standing at the edge of freedom, and a commanding figure who clearly has no intention of simply letting us walk away. "You have two choices," the ranking officer says, its translated voice carrying a strange mixture of authority and genuine curiosity. "Surrender now, and this incident will be recorded as contained without further complication. Or continue, and force a confrontation your species has never once demonstrated the capacity to win." I glance at Grace, who meets my eyes with a look that says she is ready for whatever comes next, then at the small group behind us, faces pale but resolute, none of them stepping back, none of them looking away. "You keep saying my species has never demonstrated something," I say, turning back to face the officer directly. "But every single assumption you just listed is based on what your scanners could measure, and your scanners were never built to measure the thing that actually matters." "And what is that?" the officer asks, and for the first time, I hear something beneath the authority in its voice, something that might almost be described as doubt. "Persistence," I say simply. "You can take every weapon a person carries, and it changes nothing about what that person is willing to do to protect the people standing beside them. You built an entire system of safety around metal and energy readings, And somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask what happens when the danger you're trying to contain was never really about the metal at all. The officer studies me for a long moment, and behind it, I notice several of the guards shifting slightly, glancing toward each other with an uncertainty that was entirely absent from every guard I encountered on my first day here. Word has clearly spread faster than the facility's leadership expected, carried through whispered reports and hurried alarms. And even here, even now, I can see the beginning of a crack forming in their careful, confident understanding of what an unarmed prisoner actually means. This confrontation does not need to continue, Grace says suddenly, stepping forward slightly beside me, her voice steady despite the danger surrounding us. You have prisoners here from a dozen different species, most of whom have simply accepted your definition of what they are capable of. But you just watched a small group of unarmed humans dismantle security measures your facility has relied on for years, without a single serious injury on either side. That should tell you something far more valuable than another confrontation ever could. The officer's posture shifts slightly, and for a moment, the corridor holds its breath, waiting. You believe I should simply let you leave, it says. I believe, I say carefully, that you should ask yourself what happens the next time your Accord captures a human ship, confiscates every weapon on board, and assumes the danger has been fully contained. Because if the answer to that question is anything like what just happened here, then continuing this confrontation right now accomplishes nothing, except proving my point in a far more costly way. Silence stretches through the corridor, heavy and uncertain. I can feel the weapon in my hand, light and unfamiliar, and I know with absolute clarity that if this comes down to a direct confrontation between our small group and the guards filling the hallway behind the officer, the numbers are not in our favor. But numbers were never really the thing keeping us alive since the moment those doors first opened. The officer finally lowers its weapon slightly, just enough to signal something has shifted in its calculations. This facility has never needed to consider human prisoners a serious internal risk, it says slowly, almost to itself. That assumption clearly requires revision. It does, I agree. You understand, the officer continues, that allowing you to leave does not erase the disruption you have caused. There will be consequences, reports, investigations into how a species considered harmless once disarmed managed to breach 3 levels of internal security, using nothing more than opportunity and improvised tools. There should be, I say, because the alternative is continuing to believe that a scanner reading of 0 weapons actually means 0 danger, and the next facility that makes that same assumption might not be lucky enough to face a group willing to stop the moment stopping, became the smarter choice. The officer studies me for one final long moment, then gestures slowly to the guards behind it, a silent command that causes weapons to lower, formation to loosen, tension to bleed slowly out of the corridor, like air escaping a sealed container. Go, it says finally. This facility will submit a full report to Accord Command. Perhaps it is time the wider council reconsidered certain long-held assumptions about the species it has chosen to underestimate. I do not move immediately, watching carefully for any sign of deception, any final trap waiting to spring the moment we lower our guard. But the officer simply steps aside, and the guards behind it part slowly, creating a narrow path toward the open platform doors beyond. Grace glances at me, and I give a small nod, gesturing for the group to move forward carefully, watching every angle as we walk the narrow path between rows of guards who watch us pass with expressions I cannot fully read, somewhere between resentment and something that looks almost like reluctant respect. We reach the platform, and the wide-open sky spreads out above us, pale and vast, dotted with the shapes of distant ships and the soft glow of a sun I do not recognize. Grace leads us toward a smaller vessel near the edge of the platform, one she clearly identified during her long months of careful observation as a viable means of escape should the opportunity ever arise. This one's fast, she says, running her hand along the hull as we approach. Not built for combat, but built to outrun almost anything that might chase it. We board quickly, and I take one final look back at the facility behind us, its massive structure rising against the pale sky, guards still watching from the platform's edge, the ranking officer standing motionless among them, observing our departure with an expression that has shifted, somewhere in the last few minutes, from certainty into something far more complicated. The ship's engines hum to life beneath us, and Grace guides us smoothly away from the platform, rising higher into the pale sky, until the facility shrinks slowly behind us, becoming smaller and smaller, until it disappears entirely into the vast curve of the world below. I settle into a seat near the front of the small vessel, letting the tension finally drain from my shoulders, watching the stars begin to emerge as we climb higher into the darkening sky. Grace sits beside me, guiding the controls with steady, practiced hands, and behind us, the small group of freed prisoners sits quietly, some crying softly with relief, others simply staring out the viewport in stunned, grateful silence. "You did that," Grace says quietly, glancing over at me. "Back there, with the officer. You didn't just fight your way out, you made them think." "Fighting only gets you so far," I say, watching the stars grow brighter as the ship climbs further from the world below. Sometimes the more important weapon is making someone question everything they thought they understood. Grace is quiet for a moment, then smiles faintly, the first real smile I have seen on her face since we met. "They're going to remember this," she says. "Every facility across that accord is going to hear what happened here. A group of unarmed prisoners, breaching internal security, forcing a full retreat from armed guards, and walking straight out the front door, because their own commanding officer couldn't find a good enough reason to stop them." I think about that for a long moment, watching the darkness of open space stretch out ahead of us, filled with countless points of distant light. "They confiscated every weapon they could find," I say quietly. "Every gun, every blade, every piece of metal a scanner could detect. They walked away certain they had removed every possible danger, satisfied and comfortable in their careful, confident assumptions." Grace glances over at me, waiting. "They never once stopped to ask what kind of species builds those weapons in the first place," I continue. "What kind of history shapes hands that can turn nothing into something, and something into everything, the instant it actually matters? They measured danger by counting metal, and by that measurement, they were never wrong. But metal was never really the point. It never has been. Not for us." The ship continues its steady climb through the darkening sky, carrying its small group of survivors further from the facility behind us, and further toward whatever waits ahead. Somewhere far behind, I imagine the ranking officer standing on that platform, watching the space where our ship disappeared, already composing the careful, uncertain words of a report that will eventually reach every corner of the Accord's wide-reaching command structure. A report that will end, I suspect, with a single, quiet directive, passed down through every facility, every checkpoint, every boarding party still confident in the safety of their careful scanners and thorough confiscations. Never assume a human is harmless simply because their hands are empty. Restrain them fully, or do not engage at all. Because somewhere between the moment they take away every weapon a person carries, and the moment they walk away satisfied with an empty scanner reading, they will have missed the only thing that ever truly mattered. The weapon was never in our hands. It was standing quietly in front of them the entire time, watching, waiting, and counting every single second until the moment finally arrived.